I started this project in November of 2020. Most of the major components are now in the car, but I still have quite a few bits on my shed floor that I want to get rid of. So in this episode, I install the rest of the driveline components, the exhaust, and finally make the car look like a car again. So welcome to Shed Sesh, episode 4. As I have the whole shifter linkage out of the car, it was easier to install the bushings while the linkage was on the bench. The best way to remove the big round bushing out of the shifter linkage support bar is to just cut it out. I then gave the area a quick clean, then greased everything up with some specialty bushing silicone grease. To install the shifter linkage, I lowered the gearbox down by removing the gearbox mount, so it means I could get a better angle to slide the linkage on. The bolts that hold the end bushing that connects to the body are usually pretty difficult to get in, but as long as you get one in, then you can leverage the bolt off the other side and screw it in. Next was the tail shaft. One little tip is when you go to put the tail shaft in, make sure you get one of the bolts that connects the shaft to the diff and put that in first. That means that you're not trying to hold everything up while you're trying to tighten it. With the car lowered a little bit and the wheels off, it's now time to install the front drive shafts. To install them, you need to disconnect the sway bar and the ball joint. I then gave the drive shafts a quick little clean, especially on the end that mounted to the hub. Like previous videos, a bit of brake cleaner, a wire brush and some Scotch-Brite cleaned them up perfectly. And then I used some white lithium grease to ensure that that drive shaft will never get stuck in that hub. I have a white line bump steer correction kit, which is really good on the car once it's installed, but to install it and remove it, it is quite a pain, especially regarding the ball joint. The ball joint seems to have a steeper angle than the stock one, so it meant that I had to hammer a chisel into the hub, so then I could lever it out. They were so stuck in there that I was just bending my pry bar, but I think it's time to get a new pry bar anyway. I don't have it on video, but the first thing you should do when installing a drive shaft is run your finger on the inside of the seal in the transmission to ensure that the spring is nice and seated. Then just supporting the end, literally shove it into the transmission until it clicks in. You'll need to use a bit of force, but it will go in eventually. As usual, pull the hub back, put the drive shaft in the other end, put on the drive shaft nut, and then hammer in the ball joints back into place. Just got to reconnect the sway bar, and there we are, the drive shafts are in. I took the pitch stop mount off the transmission just for a little bit of extra clearance, and so I could remove some of the rust on there, repair it, and give it a nice new paint job. I did forget though, to install the pitch stop mount, it means I would need to remove the starter motor. So out came those bell housing bolts. I then undid the transmission case bolts, to then slide the pitch stop mount bracket into place. It's important to tighten the pitch stop mount and the pitch stop quite tight, because usually if there's a knocking sound after you do a clutch, that's often where it is coming from. It was now time to put the slave cylinder in. I've got a brand new Hell braided line for the clutch, as I noticed the old hose ages ago when I replaced it was not in the best condition. I put a little bit of copper grease on the end of the slave cylinder that connects to the clutch fork, so it means that there would be no seizing. My SP Tools flex head flare nut spanners came in real handy here. Because of the angle of where the connection is, basically I could then flex the head out of the way and get a full length of turning stroke. In an effort to remove parts out of my shed and actually get them on the cars, I decided to install the exhaust. And when it comes to exhaust for Subarus, there is one brand that many people swear by, including myself, and that is Invidia. And here we are, this is my new exhaust. So I decided to go with a Q300 with a catted downpipe. I went for the catted downpipe mainly just for legalities, so when the cops do look over the car, that's one less thing they can ping me on. And then the Q300, it's got a really nice tone, but it's not really loud. That should help with not attracting so many police. Plus also, it means this will come under the noise limit of any racetrack in the country, Plus, it's a full flowing exhaust. People go for Invidia exhaust just because of the quality and the fitment. The research and development on these exhausts is absolutely remarkable compared to a lot of other brands. I fitted a few Invidia catbacks and dump pipes before and never run into issues regarding fitment. They come with some really good quality hardware, good quality gaskets for once, which is actually rare with aftermarket exhaust. Most of the aftermarket exhaust gaskets are actually really bad, but these, I've always used them, where with most catbacks, I would try to go for the factory gasket. Best of all, they come with cool stickers, so they'll look sick on the hoist. One reason why so many people go for these exhausts as well is just because of the quality of the bell up the top here. It's got a very, very good quality casting. It doesn't restrict any exhaust gas, so it helps the engine breathe a lot. I always recommend when fitting a brand new dump pipe, you always buy a new gasket. These gaskets are always overlooked and they are very easy to leak. Due to the crushed design of the inside lip of the gasket, once they're kind of crushed together, they don't really seal the same ever since. So that's why it's important you're careful, so it only goes on once to ensure a maximum seal. And they're cheap enough anyway, so anytime you've got to take the dump off, it's cheap to replace and you know you won't have any issues. So let's chuck this bad boy on. So I installed a new gasket onto the turbo exhaust housing and fed the dump pipe up to the turbo. Because it's stainless steel, it's relatively lightweight, of course not as lightweight as a titanium exhaust, but honestly the one thing that I love about Invidia exhausts is the fact that they use 14mm headed bolts. So many exhaust brands use weird sizes that don't really correlate with Subarus, but Invidia know Subarus well, so they use a very standardized bolt size. Tightening the dump pipe bolts to the turbo is quite difficult without the right tools, but my King Chrome Flex Head extendable ratchet is honestly the most perfect tool for this job. One tip that I suggest is that you go out and buy a single hex 3/8 14mm socket, not a long socket, just a standard one. A nice relatively short single hex 3/8 socket will be perfect to tighten the bottom turbo nut underneath the bell of the dump pipe and the nut that's closest to the transmission. With the exhaust mounted and bolted up, I could now install the O2 sensor. I decided to drill a hole in the transmission mount just so it meant I could have an extra point to zip tie the wire along, because often the factory clips that keep the wire nice and tucked break, so a zip tie is a good replacement. The O2 sensor wire needs to be routed correctly because just below it is a very hot exhaust and just above it is a spinning tail shaft. If it gets caught on either of those, it's going to break, and O2 sensors are not exactly cheap. To finish up the exhaust, I just needed to install the heat shields onto the headers. On the heat shield on the driver's side, it's a good idea to trim off some of the heat shield, so it means you can take it off without removing the O2 sensor. By just trimming this little bit off, it won't really affect that much heat management, and it will be so much easier to remove and install the headers. To remove more stuff from my shed, I then installed the radiator. I pulled my GoPro out and experimented with multi-camera angles. It means that hopefully I can get a better camera angle in spots that is hard to capture with a camera on a tripod. I needed to move the car outside and it was going to rain, so it meant that I needed to put the bonnet on, the fenders and the front bumper. As I painted the whole engine bay, it means that there would have been paint in the threads of where the bolts go to attach the fender. So I just quickly went around with a tap and blew it all out with compressed air. I didn't care too much about the position of the fenders, as I'll be taking them off when I paint the rest of the car. To wrap up this episode, I installed the headlight supports. I really needed to get the car off the hoist so I could put my girlfriend's car on it. So, off camera, I installed the headlights, the bonnet, and the front bumper. With all the body parts for the front end on, it now actually looks a bit like a car. It was really rewarding putting those parts in the car, as it meant that I could now leave the car outside and not care about it getting water damaged, plus it actually looks like a WRX again. Unfortunately, it's still got mismatched paint, but once it's all painted, it should look really good. Anyway, I decided to practice some editing, so this is what the car now looks like. Many new editing techniques were learnt to make that short video. But anyway, thank you for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed the new camera angles. I still got a lot of improvement to make that new angle actually look good, but it all takes practice. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and liking, and if you have any feedback or comments, leave them down in the comments section below. You can also follow me on Instagram at 07carves. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.